Sit back, relax, and turn on your Tell Me Vision. Quirky TV comedy characters of the 1980s. There have always been peculiar characters in comedy, but the 1980s was very unique. No decade before, or since, produced so many offbeat TV personas of this sort. It was neat because the people who portrayed them really made us think they were for real. They would even appear in various TV shows and movies by their character names. Why did they all come in the 1980s? I don't think anyone could give a definite answer. My guess is that a lot of people were just on the same wavelengths. Come to the party with me as we hang out with some of the strangest but most likable TV comedy characters of the 1980s, including Pee Wee Herman, Ernest, Elvira, Ed Grimley, Larry Bud Melman, and Larry Darryl and Darryl. Pee Wee Herman. Real name Paul Reubens. Although Paul's real name became better known after the 1991 incident, I don't think many Pee Wee fans were aware of his real name during the heyday of Pee Wee Herman. Pee Wee was a huge star of the 1980s, not Paul Reubens. Paul originally developed the character in 1977 when he was with the Groundlings improv group. Phil Hartman, long before his Saturday Night Live fame, was also a Groundling and helped Paul develop the character. Pee Wee was originally intended as an adult-oriented send-up of the old kiddie shows from the 1950s. A lot of what you saw with Pee Wee Herman was a throwback to those times. Pee Wee's background is mysterious. We never got to know much about his childhood or his relatives. He's a quirky man-child, and we don't even know what he does for a living. Pee Wee is just Pee Wee, and you have to take him at face value. Despite his ambiguous history, the Pee Wee Herman character was endearing enough to have a successful franchise including movies, a TV show, books, and toys. In 1979, Paul debuted the Pee Wee character on, of all things, a game show, and even more surprising, the dating game. He was on it 3 times. Since this character was very new, and he was presented as a real person, a lot of people were like, what is this guy about? Where did they dig him up? In 1980, Paul really thought the Pee Wee Herman character would have a chance to shine if he was the star of his own act. He started developing his own stage show. Around the same time, he made his first movie appearance as the Pee Wee character in Cheech and Chong's Next Movie. If you only know Pee Wee Herman from his TV show or movies, his appearance in the Cheech and Chong movie will blow your mind. You first see him as an obnoxious desk clerk. Then you see him performing in a nightclub. Cheech and Chong is a very adult comedy act, so you'll see Pee Wee take part in a lot of crude sexual humor, racist jokes, and profanity. It's funny, but it's not the Pee Wee Herman that anyone would come to know. In February of 1981, his stage act of The Pee Wee Herman Show started as a midnight show at the Groundlings Theater. It was enough of a hit that it moved to the Roxy Theater in September of that year. The HBO network, famous for its comedy specials, decided to tape one of these performances. This proved to be fateful. It's important to state that at this time, his stage act was very adult-oriented and not really made for kids. Cable, especially in the early 1980s, had a peculiar way of making things popular. Sometimes, a show would become more popular a few years down the road after multiple showings. This is what happened with the Pee Wee Herman Show. Yes, it was liked from the start, but it stayed within the realm of cable stuff. For all of the 1980s and much of the 1990s, cable shows weren't at an equal level of popularity with the traditional network shows. A few things worked in Pee-wee's favor. For one thing, a VHS videotape was released that proved to be popular. For another, David Letterman. If Pee Wee Herman owed his mainstream success to anyone, it was David Letterman. Pee Wee made his first of many appearances on the popular late-night talk show in 1982. It made the Pee Wee character known to a national audience in a way that he had never been before. It also made his cable special better known. In 1985, Pee Wee was given his very first feature film. It may have still seemed like a gamble, but it was a huge hit and remains as one of the great comedy movie classics of the 1980s. Pee-wee's Big Adventure expanded the character's universe in a big way. To be a family film, Pee-wee was toned down quite a bit, but it worked. It actually made Pee-wee a more likable and accessible character. They didn't totally wimp him out, though, and there was still some adult innuendo. The movie was about Pee-wee going on a cross-country adventure in search of a stolen bike. This was awesome, and once and for all, Pee Wee Herman was an established phenomenon of the 1980s. In 1986, Pee-wee was given his own Saturday morning TV show. Pee-wee's Playhouse was a big hit that had just as much of an adult audience as it did kids. Pee-wee was toned down even more here than he was in the movie, but, like I said, it actually seemed to help the character rather than hurt him. There was still some adult innuendo, though, especially when it came to the character of Missy Vaughn. The show made new episodes until 1990, and continued in reruns until 1991. Up until 1991, Pee Wee Herman appeared in many other TV shows and movies. You saw him everywhere. Then, in July of that year, Paul Reubens was arrested for playing with himself in an adult theater. The movie? Nurse Nancy with Sandra Scream. Well, I guess if he was going to do it, he picked the right girl. Why this was such a controversy is something I, and a lot of people, never understood. He did what people do in those places. It ain't cool, but it's not that unusual. Plus, he looked nothing like Pee-wee at the time, sporting a full Fu Manchu beard. Who in the heck recognized him that easily? This blew up all over the place. It really hurt Paul Reubens' career for a while, and it killed the Pee Wee Herman character dead. The reruns were pulled from TV. Pee Wee Herman became a punchline everywhere, by everybody, on TV and in public. I always thought this was unfair. To some level, the jokes were funny, even for fans like me. A lot of times, though, the picking got too cruel. It took a long time for Paul Reubens to start getting work after that. Even so, it was never in leading roles. He did, however, get a major part in the superhero spoof movie Mystery Men, playing a funny hero by the name of The Spleen. That was in 1999. I thought he was good in every acting part he did. It took until 2009 for Paul Reubens to decide that he was going to revive the Pee Wee Herman character via a stage show. The Pee Wee Herman stage show, The Return, opened in January of 2010 and was a big hit. He worked hard to get another Pee Wee movie made. In 2016, he finally came out with Pee Wee's Big Holiday. It premiered on Netflix, and although it allegedly did well with viewers, it didn't seem to get much notice or acclaim. I'm going to say this very plain. Netflix movies aren't theater movies. If you want a movie to be really big and really successful, don't make it a streaming exclusive. It's that simple. Plus, Netflix seems to water down its original movies to suit their own agenda, taking the bite out of things. This movie would be the last time Paul Reubens played the character before his death in 2023. Ernest P. Worrell, or simply known as Ernest, was like the southern counterpart to Pee Wee Herman. I don't believe Ernest was influenced by Pee Wee in any way. The Ernest character started appearing in commercials in 1980, before Pee Wee Herman even became an established stage act. Still, there are some similarities here. Ernest was a character created in the Nashville, Tennessee area by John Cherry III for the Carden and Cherry Advertising Agency. Ernest was made to pimp just about any product or service that was available. Many commercials were made, and it was mainly because of Ernest's actor. Jim Varney played the hyper, rubber-faced man-child called Ernest. Jim wasn't much like Ernest. He actually had a photographic memory and was quite competent, allowing the ad agency to film many commercials in a day. Ernest was originally developed as a TV spokesman for various local businesses. Kids especially seemed to like Ernest and imitated him with his immortal catchphrase, "Know what I mean?" Ernest was in so many commercials that he got noticed on a national level. The national products he endorsed were for Coca-Cola, Chex cereals, and Taco John's. In the commercials, Ernest talked to an off-screen character named Vern. Ernest thought Vern was a friend, although it was clearly indicated that Vern thought he was a pest. You never saw Vern or heard his voice, except on one rare occasion that I'll talk about later. But he became a big part of the Ernest act. It was very clear that Ernest was becoming a phenomenon with the potential to make it outside of commercials. As early as 1983, a direct-to-video special was released called "Hey Vern, It's My Family Album." This was funny, but clearly not a movie, as some sources like to indicate. It did, however, start expanding upon Ernest's character. Ernest made a brief appearance on HBO's New Year's special in 1984, heading into 1985. This was a big indicator that good things were on the horizon for Ernest. He was starting to become a player. In 1985, another special was made featuring Ernest. Sort of. It was called Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Bean. It had a limited release in theaters, and is generally thought of as being direct-to-video. It was a science fiction / horror film where Ernest was really just a disguise of the villain, Dr. Otto. I'll be honest, I don't care for this one. Ernest's forays into horror don't come off right. They're a bit too dark. For instance, the later film, Ernest Scared Stupid, is the only film in the series I don't care for at all. Ernest is better as a straight, funny character. Unlike Pee Wee Herman, Ernest P. Worrell was always made as a child-friendly character. There was no innuendo with him. Also unlike Pee Wee, you knew a lot about Ernest's background. Maybe too much. Ernest had a large family, and in his life had taken on a number of jobs. The first actual Ernest movie was in 1987 called Ernest Goes to Camp. When this came out, it was big, especially with kids. People wanted to see more Ernest movies after this, and they got them. There were 9 real Ernest movies in all, only ending due to Jim Varney's untimely death. There was no continuity between the films, each one being a standalone production. Watching Ernest movies is like watching old cartoons. When one is over, Ernest basically resets himself for the next one. In 1988, Ernest was given his own Saturday morning TV series on CBS, basically to latch on to the success already established with Pee Wee's Playhouse. Hey Vern, It's Ernest was a good TV show, and if you like the Ernest movies, you'll like the show. I thought it was a good idea to put it with the Pee Wee show. Unfortunately, the Hey Vern series didn't take and only lasted 13 episodes. I think it had a lot more life left in it. Jim Varney made a lot of appearances as the Ernest character outside of his commercials, movies, and TV show. People just took him as Ernest. When a lot of people discovered the name of Ernest's actor, it was like, oh, Jim Varney is his real name. It's not like Ernest was ever an alias for Jim Varney. It was just a character. But that's how attached the character was to the person. In 1989, Ernest appeared in Comic Relief USA, and for the first and only time, we got to see Vern, played by an actor named Doug Cox. Although Ernest was Jim Varney's best-known character, he was actually able to have an acting career outside of Ernest. He appeared in a number of movies and TV shows, and was good in all of them. A real surprise is when Jim took on the character of Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies movie in 1993. He really did a good job in that, as did the whole cast. Pulling off a movie adaptation of a beloved series like that was real ballsy, but it came out awesome. In my mind, it's a comedy classic. Despite the fact that Ernest was such a huge character in the 1980s and 90s, he was never a powerhouse merchandising machine. A few funny paperback books of Ernest were made, and a talking doll was made by Kenner. That was about it. The major part of Ernest's success was his movies. His first 4 movies, although not Disney movies, had a Disney distribution deal. Specifically, Touchstone Pictures as the production company, and Buena Vista Pictures as the distributor. Still, Disney. The production values were noticeably higher end in these earlier movies. The 4th one, Ernest Scared Stupid, just wasn't a good movie. And after this one did so-so in theaters, Ernest lost his distribution deal with Disney. People liked Ernest so much, though, that it was proven he could survive without Disney's involvement. Ernest Rides Again, the 5th film, was the first one to be independently financed by John Cherry. It was released in theaters, but didn't do well. It did, however, fare much better on video. The next movie, Ernest Goes to School, got a limited release in theaters before it went to video. After that, it was decided to make all Ernest movies direct to video, and people still watch them. I will say this much. Even though the Ernest movies, at this point, didn't have Disney money to back them up, they were still good movies. They had good stories, good actors, and they managed to take the taste of poop out of my mouth that I got from watching Ernest Scared Stupid. The last Ernest movie, Ernest in the Army, was released in 1998. Jim Varney died on February 10th, 2000. He loved the Ernest character, despite the fact that he had the ability to do Shakespearean acting. As he was dying of cancer, Jim Varney would still dress up as Ernest to entertain sick children in the hospital. That's just awesome. He appreciated what the Ernest character did for him. You can even see that in his interviews. Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. If you're talking about famous women of the 1980s, fictional or not, they don't get more famous or iconic than Elvira. She nailed that hard-to-master combination of sexy and funny. Although the character debuted in 1981, her origins can be traced back to 1979. Elvira, real name Cassandra Peterson, was actually a redhead. She had been a Las Vegas showgirl, making history as the youngest at age 17. Cassandra even made an appearance as a showgirl in the James Bond movie Diamonds Are Forever, so Elvira was a Bond girl. Throughout the 70s, Cassandra danced and modeled for men's magazines, but she really wanted to break into music and comedy. She didn't know it at the time, but everything she was doing would apply directly to what would make her super famous. In 1979, Cassandra became a member of the Groundlings improv group in Los Angeles. So many talented people came from the Groundlings at that time, like Paul Reubens and Phil Hartman, to name a few, and they all remained friends after their careers took off, which is cool to know. At the Groundlings, Cassandra created a Valley Girl type character that would later become a large part of the Elvira persona later on. In Cassandra's own words, Elvira's personality type was like a cross between a bubble-headed high school girl and a trucker. How Cassandra became a superstar is something no one could imagine. It was a twist of fate that worked in her favor. Plus, she was just real good in the first place. Fright Night was a weekend horror TV show in the Los Angeles area. Its host was a man named Larry Vincent, who played a character called Sinister Seymour. On the show, Seymour would bash on the low-budget horror movies they played. People really liked this. Vincent died in 1975, and so did the show. The producers wanted to bring the show back, but trying to put another guy in his place would be pure folly. They decided on a female presenter. Melman, who played the scary but funny vampire character in the 1950s, was the first person considered for the project. She dropped out early on when the producers refused to hire Lola Falana to star her as the vampire character. Yeah, none of that makes sense to me either. Cassandra Peterson auditioned for the show and won. The producers were wise in the way that they let her create the show's character. She and her best friend, Robert Redding, came up with a sexy, gothic-looking vampire chick. Strange thing, though, it was never expressly stated that Elvira was a vampire. She just looked strange. Years later, in her first movie, it was revealed that Elvira came from a family of witches. Even after that, Elvira never played up to being any kind of creature in particular, just strange and sexy. The white makeup that makes Elvira look pale was an idea lifted from the kabuki makeup used by Japanese performers, and it gave her an exotic geisha girl look. Her unique hairstyle was taken from the hairstyle used by the girl group the Ronettes of the early 1960s. The dress is perhaps the most interesting part of Elvira's ensemble. Nobody ever saw a dress like that before, and not every woman could wear that dress with as much success. Before the first taping of the show, Melman, Vampira herself, sent a cease and desist letter to the producers. She claimed that Elvira was a ripoff of Vampira. Cassandra has always maintained that it isn't. The court agreed with Cassandra, and the fact that Elvira became so successful was always a point of contention with Nurmi. Seriously, besides the color of the black dress and hair, there isn't much the same between Vampira and Elvira. What I am about to say is not meant as a put-down, it's just fact. Vampira isn't as sexy as Elvira. She wasn't meant to be. She also didn't have the outrageous personality of Elvira. Vampira was a bit more bland, but that's what she was supposed to be. Vampira herself was based off Morticia Addams from the Charles Addams cartoons, long before the famous Addams Family series. Addams could have sued Nurmi for that, because that was a closer resemblance. The idea of dark, scary-looking women, though, is a very old idea that predates Morticia Addams by quite a bit. The show was renamed from Fright Night to Movie Macabre. Although meant to be a local Los Angeles show, Movie Macabre quickly gained national coverage due to Elvira herself. This was a rather unique character no one had seen before. Although she looked odd, she wasn't scary by any means. Her personality was like a cross between a valley girl and a trucker. She basically said anything she liked. She mocked the movies they played, and herself. Elvira made a lot of boob jokes. It wasn't long before Elvira was being talked about in magazines like Playboy and featured on shows like The Tonight Show. She quickly started making a lot of appearances as Elvira in a lot of TV shows and movies like The Fall Guy and Stroker Ace. This only became more of a thing as time went on. But more popular than any of that was Elvira's brand. She was in a ton of commercials for beer and other things. She was immortalized in all kinds of products like costumes, comic books, action figures, trading cards, all kinds of things. Elvira merchandise became big business in the 1980s, and it stayed that way. Elvira's popularity really peaked in 1988 when she got her first movie, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. I loved this movie back then, and I love it now. It was funny, sexy, and it had a good story. For the first time ever, Elvira was given a backstory, and it was pretty cool. As we find out, Elvira didn't even know why she was like she was until she learns of her family's past. Everybody I know who saw the movie liked it, but at the time it still flopped. Why would this even be? Especially when the character of Elvira was so popular. The distribution company for this film went out of business literally the day before the film's release. The movie was supposed to appear in over 2,500 theaters, but dropped to 500. Considering that, the movie actually did make pretty good money. It's just that not enough people were able to see it. Since that time, though, this movie has done well on home media and is considered a cult favorite. Believe it or not, even with that film's initial failure, Cassandra quickly sold a script for a sequel. What squelched it is the fact that Kuroko Pictures went bankrupt. After that, a direct sequel to Mistress of the Dark would forever be mired in red tape. Although still a media darling, Elvira had a difficult time finding her own shows to star in. She filmed a pilot for a sitcom called The Elvira Show in 1993, but it was not picked up. This was actually an interesting show, and should have had a chance. She was going to have another movie called Elvira vs. the Vampire Women, but a contract dispute with Roger Corman stopped that from happening. In 2001, Elvira finally came out with her second movie, Elvira's Haunted Hills. This is a good movie, but absolutely unrelated to her previous film. She still couldn't make a direct sequel to Mistress of the Dark. The script for Haunted Hills was written in the late 1990s, but she couldn't get Hollywood to produce it after 3 years of trying. Cassandra and her husband, Mark Pearson, decided to finance it themselves. It had a few theatrical showings, but was released direct-to-video in 2002. To be honest, this didn't seem like a low-budget movie at all, and should have been shown in theaters on a larger scale. Even Elvira, at the end of the movie, remarks, "I can't believe we could afford such a cool effect." Since then, Elvira has still been kicking around, but nothing major besides a couple of Scooby-Doo cartoon movies. She is one of the major women icons of the 1980s decade, and more woman than most men can handle. Ed Grimley. This is a character who is interesting to watch because he's so odd. Ed Grimley is totally harmless, but odd. His appearance, mannerisms, and speech pattern is what makes him so funny. Ed Grimley doesn't really tell jokes. He's just really, really awkward. I think, at times, everyone feels like an Ed Grimley. At least a little bit. Or knows someone that nerdy. He's relatable, and that's what makes him so endearing. Ed Grimley isn't a mean sort at all. He's just happy in his own nerdiness. Unlike a lot of the quirky comedy characters in the 1980s, everyone knew Ed Grimley was played by Martin Short. However, when he played Ed Grimley, the character really came to life and took on his own personality. I'm a Martin Short fan all the way, but there were a number of people who liked Ed Grimley, and that was it. Audiences could separate the two, which is why Martin was able to do so much other stuff. Although the character officially debuted on the sketch comedy show SCTV in 1982, his origins date back a bit earlier. Martin Short, while in Toronto's Second City Improv Group, developed an early version of the character that was a bit different. Over the course of repeat performances, the character of Ed Grimley became more like we know him today. The character is known for his tall, cowlick hairdo, wearing pants that almost go up to his chest, and a frequent baring of his teeth, Like Pee Wee Herman or Ernest, he was a boy who refused to grow up. He's obsessed with the darndest things, like Pat Sajak from the Wheel of Fortune game show, and playing the triangle, to name a few. He had several catchphrases with, I must say, being the most popular. Completely mental and give me a break were also used often. Ed Grimley's first SCTV appearance was in the sketch The Nutty Lab Assistant, a spoof of The Nutty Professor. This was hilarious, where Ed Grimley turned into the real-life John Cougar Mellencamp. After that, the character just took off, and they put him in anything. Ed Grimley was an easy laugh, whether he played Billy the Kid, Oliver Twist, or whoever. He would attempt to tell you about snakes or anything, with disastrous results. What is important to keep in mind is that SCTV was a late-night comedy show, like Saturday Night Live. It had its share of adult humor, although they weren't quite as edgy as Saturday Night Live always tried to be. Still, this show was for grown-up people and shown late at night. And still this character was an immediate hit with little kids. The character started making appearances outside of SCTV on other shows and in actual commercials. When SCTV ended in 1984, Martin Short joined Saturday Night Live and took the character of Ed Grimley with him. Although Short was only on Saturday Night Live for one season, he was immensely popular. By 1985, it was clear Martin was ready for bigger projects like movies and television. He was still well liked by fans of Saturday Night Live, though, and came back to host the show at the time of this video on 5 different occasions. In 1985, Grimley was one of the characters Martin played in his Showtime comedy special, Martin Short, Concert for the North Americas. Although Grimley wasn't Martin Short's only popular thing happening, Martin never tried to distance himself from it. Throughout the 1980s and 90s, Martin was in a lot of popular movies like The Three Amigos, Inner Space, and The Three Fugitives, to name a few. But Ed Grimley still made TV appearances here and there. In 1988, there was even an Ed Grimley Saturday morning cartoon series. I liked this at the time, but it sure didn't last that long. Hanna-Barbera produced The Completely Mental Misadventures of Ed Grimley. It was great in the way that it also had most of the SCTV cast doing voices here and there, with Joe Flaherty as Count Floyd being the most regular. It ran for only 13 episodes in a time span of less than 3 months. At the time, a talking Ed Grimley doll was released. I'm surprised this didn't take off. At the time, Pee-wee's Playhouse was on TV and a big hit. They tried giving Ernest a TV show and Ed Grimley a cartoon, but it kind of seems like nothing else along that order was allowed to make it. After this, the push for Ed Grimley ceased, and the character has only made occasional appearances since. For a very brief time in 1994, Martin Short was given his own self-titled sitcom in which Ed Grimley made an appearance. In 1996, the character showed up in an episode of Muppets Tonight, a short-lived revival of The Muppet Show. This was great because you got to see Ed Grimley interact with Miss Piggy. You know that's funny. Later in 1996, the character was briefly killed off on Saturday Night Live, with the joke being that he had to do more with his life before he could come back to heaven. From 1999 to 2000, Martin Short had his own talk show, also called The Martin Short Show, in which Ed Grimley made a number of appearances. Why Martin's talk show was canceled so quickly has always eluded me. I remember a lot of people talking about it and liking it in my travels, so I just can't believe it had low ratings. I have never believed in the rating system anyway. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, Ed Grimley has come back on a handful of occasions. By that point, Martin Short had already made an incredible career for himself, and he still brought out his famous character. Larry Bud Melman. Although his real name was Calvert DeForest, everyone knew him as Larry Bud Melman. He was sort of a mascot character of David Letterman's talk show, beginning in early 1982 through the summer of 2002, when he retired from acting. Melman was an anything character. He looked funny to begin with, short, pudgy, with a gnome-like face, and thick, black-rimmed glasses. He had a funny voice. Letterman's writers had him doing just about any funny thing they could think of on the show. Whether it was a fake commercial for one of his businesses, or running errands for Dave himself, Larry Bud Melman was always there. Although Melman was primarily a character on Letterman, he popped up everywhere on other TV shows, music videos, and commercials. Calvert didn't have a lot of range as an actor. Him and Melman were basically one and the same. He was a likable oddball, though, so he got mileage. It was an easy gag if we mentioned his name, and he just popped up for a few moments. Calvert's success came late in life. He started acting in 1972, but in small parts of little-seen movies. When he appeared on Letterman for the first time, it was the greatest moment of his life. He became a fixture, and no other talk show, before or since, had a character quite like him. Since Melman was a vague character by design, we never got to know much about him. He did have a teenage son, though, named Troy Chipper Melman. Troy rarely talked, and usually coughed a lot. In 1993, Letterman's show moved from NBC to CBS. The Larry Bud Melman character name was retired, as NBC considered it their intellectual property. That was stupid on NBC's part, because Calvert continued playing the exact same character, only using his real name from here on out. NBC gained no ground because you can't copyright a person. Calvert's last appearance on Letterman was on his 81st birthday. Larry, Darryl, and Darryl. This comedy trio was quite a sensation in the 1980s. They were supporting characters on the sitcom Newhart, but they became so incredibly popular that everyone at the time knew what you were referencing if you said Larry, Darryl, and Darryl. Larry, Darryl, and Darryl were country bumpkins in Vermont. Larry, their leader, was the only one who talked. They all seemed to know what each other was saying, though. The Darryls often had stoic expressions, but what they did and their timing often spoke volumes. It was like three people were sharing one brain and one mouth. On the outside, these three seemed like real hicks. They came off as quite weird, due to the things they did and what they were into. However, these three were full of surprises, and as the show progressed, there was no limit of story possibilities to them. They were so well liked by so many people that I'm surprised there wasn't more of a push behind them. I think they could have easily had a spin-off series, or, even more appropriate, their own series of comedy films. Ernest had his own movies. Larry, Darryl, and Darryl could have really been a hit franchise. Newhart was Bob Newhart's second sitcom, after the super successful Bob Newhart show of the 70s. Newhart became a very important and iconic show of the 80s. Bob Newhart was a deadpan comedian, so it was always the writer's intent to surround him with offbeat characters. There were a lot of offbeat characters on Newhart, but no one filled that qualification better than Larry, Darryl, and Darryl. Although they entered the series early on, with the show's second episode, they were shown very sparingly in the first two seasons. In season 1, they only appeared twice. In season 2, they were shown 4 times. By season 3, they were on the show fairly regular. The reason for them receiving regular status was due to a major cast change. Kirk Devane, who ran the Minuteman Cafe next door, moved out of the country with his wife. Larry and his brothers ended up buying the cafe and essentially became neighbors. William Sanderson played Larry, Tony Papafist played Darryl, and John Volstadt played other brother Darryl. Whenever they entered a room, Larry always felt it was necessary to introduce himself and his brothers, no matter how well he knew someone. No last names were given for the characters. As a matter of fact, you don't know much about them, period. You'll hear bits and pieces about their parents and childhood. They started off in the series with their own business, anything for a buck. They loved doing dirty, nasty jobs that most people would just hate. The first time they were on the show, they were hired to remove a dead body that had been buried in the basement of the inn years before. They were let down when the Loudons changed their mind and decided to keep the body where it was. Obviously, these were not people recently transplanted New Yorkers wanted to associate with. The next time they were shown, it was revealed that they were friends of Kirk Devane. They were put in charge of the cafe while he was having surgery in the hospital. Of course, the brothers had no idea of what they were doing, and the Loudons had to come over to help them. What further complicated things is when a scheduled prison bus stopped at the cafe and there was nothing to serve. Kirk was a lousy cafe owner, and purposely set up the brothers and the Loudons for a fall. They get back at Kirk, though, in glorious fashion. Why weren't the brothers shown more often in the first 2 seasons? They were immediate hit characters. The studio audience went bananas every time they came on set for 8 seasons. Early on, though, it was difficult for the writers to come up with story ideas for them. The characters were so good that they didn't want to cheapen them with lackluster ideas. After season 2, it just became easier to write for Larry, Darryl, and Darryl, especially when they were in close proximity to the Loudons. The brothers were quite enterprising. Every time they appeared, they were doing something big, whether it was Larry running for mayor, the brothers winning a jingle contest, going on a walkathon, whatever. They were given a lot more depth over time. For instance, it was discovered that these country bumpkins had more intelligence than what it would seem. They had close to, if not genius intellect, and a whole lot of hidden talents. A lot of times, they turned out to be the best people the Loudons knew. They weren't criminals, and they didn't try to screw anybody over, nor did they insult them. Larry, Darryl, and Darryl were quite helpful. It was also surprising who the brothers knew. Of all things, they were close personal friends with famous talk show host Johnny Carson, who actually appeared on the show. That whole notion of appearances being deceiving applies directly to Larry, Darryl, and Darryl better than anyone else. William Sanderson, as a Larry-like character, did a series of A&W root beer commercials that were quite funny and entertaining. The whole trio even made appearances, in character, on other TV shows, and in public appearances. The 2 Darryls made an appearance, talking, on an episode of the short-lived sitcom Damon in 1998. The Newhart series ended in 1990 with a legendary finale that revealed the entire series was a dream of Dr. Bob Hartley, Newhart's character from his previous series. This was mind-blowing at the time. Also mind-blowing was the reveal that the 2 Darryls could actually speak when they told their new wives, "Quiet!" The reason they never talked before was explained by Larry. I guess they've never been this PO'd before. The whole series being a dream explained why all the characters were such goofballs. However, this is when Larry, Darryl, and Darryl's hot streak of popularity ended. It was difficult to bring the series back with an ending like this, and knowing that Larry, Darryl, and Darryl were just dream characters made it a little hard for them to appear in their own projects. I think it still could have been done, but they would have to be totally separated from anything or anyone on the Newhart show. A total reinvention. The brothers did appear again, however, on a few notable occasions. In 1991, they appeared at the end of The Bob Newhart Show 19th Anniversary Special. It's a continuation of the Newhart Show ending, where Dr. Bob Hartley is talking with his friends about the dream he had. Just when everything seems resolved, he runs into Larry, Darryl, and Darryl, realizing they weren't just in his mind, and ends up more confused than ever. In 1997, the long-running sitcom Coach had its finale. Larry, Darryl, and Darryl made an appearance in this three-parter. Both Newhart and Coach were created by Barry Kemp, so the question has been brought up. Was Coach a dream of Bob Hartley as well? At any rate, it was good to see them again. Larry, Darryl, and Darryl were a big part of Newhart's success, and it's a shame that they didn't have a much longer run. Still, they live on in reruns and in the minds of anyone who experienced them the first time around. They are unforgettable. Wrapping it up. All of these characters help make TV a funny and friendly place. We could stand to have funny characters like them right now. There was a lot of personality with all of them. They weren't snarky or political, and they didn't try to divide people. As a matter of fact, different kinds of people could all like the same character. It was possible then, and it will be possible forever. The quirky comedy characters of 1980s TV will always live on in the world of Tell Me Vision.